The unbreakable woman. The night diamond rebuilt herself. Attention! Have you ever thought that some lies are whispered in secret, but the most devastating ones are defended in public? This is not just a simple story of infidelity. It is a saga about the weaponization of trust and the blinding arrogance of a man who had everything. Are you ready for a twist that will leave you breathless? Keep reading. When Eleanor Ellie Graham walked through the glass doors of the Savoy Hotel in London, the entire world seemed to stop. Not because of her gown, though it was a masterpiece of haute couture, but because of something emanating from within her. A silent, devastating force that shook the very foundations of everything that once was. Julian Thorne, the man who had destroyed 6 years of her life with lies wrapped in promises, was standing there, next to Chloe Vance, the other woman, celebrating their engagement as if Ellie had never existed. But that night, amidst the crystal chandeliers and the fake laughter of the British high society, Ellie didn't come to beg. She didn't come to cry. She came to prove that some women don't break. They rebuild themselves into diamond. And when Julian saw what he had lost, not just a wife, but the only woman who had truly loved him, it was too late, because Ellie was no longer the same. Ellie had been reborn, and her brilliance that night didn't just overshadow everyone present. It burned them. Ellie had always believed in eternal love, not because she was naive, but because she had built her entire life on the certainty that Julian Thorne was her destiny. They had met at the London School of Economics, LSE, he studying architecture, she pursuing art history. Julian was the type of man who made mundane conversations feel momentous. He spoke of buildings as if they were stone poems, and looked at Ellie as if she were the only work of art worth contemplating. They married 3 years later, in an intimate ceremony at a small chapel in the Cotswolds, with the countryside as their witness. Ellie wore a lace gown that had belonged to her grandmother, and Julian wept when he saw her walk down the aisle. "You are my home," he whispered in her ear during their first dance. Ellie believed him, believed every word. The early years were a symphony. They lived in an apartment in Notting Hill, with windows overlooking cobbled streets where the echo of nighttime footsteps mixed with the scent of fresh bread from morning bakeries. Ellie worked as a curator at the Tate Modern, a dream come true, while Julian climbed the ranks at one of Europe's most prestigious architectural firms. But dreams, Ellie would learn later, have expiration dates. It all began to change when Julian was assigned a flagship project, the redesign of a luxury resort complex in Cornwall. "It's the opportunity of my life," he told her excitedly, his eyes shining with ambition. Ellie hugged him, proud. "I always knew you would make it." What she didn't know was that along with that opportunity would come Chloe Vance, interior designer, 32, divorced, sophisticated, and as Ellie would discover months later, utterly ruthless. At first, it was the delays. "The project got complicated, love. I'll be late." Then the interrupted calls. "It's Chloe, about work. I have to take this." Afterward, the complete absences. "We have to travel to Bath to oversee the site. It'll only be 2 days." 2 days turned into 3, 3 into 5. And when Julian returned, he smelled different. Not of another perfume. That would have been too obvious. But of distance, of secrets tucked into the folds of his perfectly knotted tie. Ellie wasn't foolish. She had seen enough movies, read enough novels, heard enough testimonies from betrayed friends. She knew the signs. But there was a part of her, the part that still believed in fairy tales, that refused to accept the obvious. Until the night of March 14th. It had been a particularly difficult day at the museum. A valuable piece had been damaged during its transfer, and Ellie had spent hours coordinating with restorers and managing her superior's panic. She arrived home exhausted, her feet aching, and a desire to simply melt into her husband's arms. But Julian wasn't there. His phone rested on the dining table, intermittently lighting up with notifications. Ellie had never been the type of woman to check her partner's phone. She trusted, she believed, she respected privacy. But tonight, something inside her, an ancestral intuition that all women carry, etched in their DNA, pushed her to lift that device. It had no password. Julian had always said he had nothing to hide. Lie. The messages with Chloe were a parallel universe, a complete world Ellie was unaware of. They weren't just work conversations. They were them. Their history, their intimacy, their betrayal. I miss you. I can't stop thinking about last night. Ellie suspects something. I have to be more careful. When will you tell her? I can't keep being your secret. Soon, my love, I promise. I just need the right time. Ellie read every message. Every word was a stab. There were hundreds, thousands, months of conversations, photos that should never have existed, plans for a future that didn't include her. There was a recent photo. Julian and Chloe on a seaside restaurant terrace. He was holding her waist with a naturalness Ellie hadn't seen in years. They were smiling. They looked happy. The sound of the front door snapped her out of her trance. Julian walked in with his perfect smile, the same one that had conquered her years ago. Sorry I'm late, love. Traffic was impossible. He moved to kiss her, but Ellie took a step back. Who is Chloe? The color drained from Julian's face. For a second, just one, Ellie saw something akin to remorse. But then, like a seasoned actor, he recomposed his expression. She's my colleague. I've already told you about her. Yes, you have told me about her. Ellie lifted the phone. But you didn't tell me you love her, that you plan to leave me for her, that you've been building a parallel life for months while I wait for you like an idiot. Julian tried to grab the phone, but Ellie was quicker. She threw it against the wall, shattering it. Are you crazy? He shouted. No, Ellie replied with terrifying calm. I was crazy all these months, ignoring the obvious, but not anymore. What followed was a verbal battle that lasted hours. Julian lied, denied, minimized. He said they were just messages, that they meant nothing, that Chloe was obsessed with him. Then, when the evidence was undeniable, he changed tactics. So what if I looked for something more? You were always busy with your museum. You didn't pay attention to me anymore. I felt lonely. Ellie looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. So it's my fault for having a career, for not guessing you needed validation every second. It's not that. Get out of here. Ellie, get out of here. Julian grabbed his keys and slammed the door as he left. Ellie sank to the living room floor, surrounded by the remnants of the shattered phone, and cried until she had no earbuds left. That night, the fairy tale died. The following days were a meticulously designed torture. Julian did not return that night, nor the next. Ellie spent 48 hours in a limbo between denial and rage, watching her phone, hoping for a call, a message, an apology. Nothing. On the third day, Julian appeared, not to beg forgiveness, not to try and save their marriage. He came for his clothes. We need to talk, Julian said, avoiding her gaze as he packed shirts into a suitcase. Ellie was sitting on their bed, the one they had shared for 6 years, watching him with a mix of disbelief and nausea. I think it's better if we separate, Julian continued, with a coldness Ellie didn't recognize. This isn't working anymore. It's not making you happy. It's not making me happy. It's not making me happy, Ellie repeated, feeling the rage begin to simmer in her chest. I was perfectly happy before I discovered my husband had been betraying me for months. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to be honest. Chloe and I fell in love. It wasn't planned. It just happened." Ellie laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, as if it were an accident, like repeatedly tripping and falling into her. Julian closed the suitcase with a sharp snap. "I didn't come here to be judged. I came to tell you I'm leaving. My lawyer will be in touch to start the divorce proceedings." And just like that, without further ceremony, Julian Thorne walked out of her life. 6 years reduced to a suitcase and a broken promise. What came next was worse than the betrayal itself. London was a large city, but their social circles were not. Ellie and Julian shared friends, colleagues, and spaces, and to her horror, Ellie discovered that most of them already knew. "Oh, Elle, I thought you already knew," Monica, an old LSE classmate, told her during an awkward encounter at a cafe in Soho. "Everyone was talking about Julian and Chloe at last month's gallery opening. I thought you had come to some kind of arrangement." Arrangement! Ellie began putting the pieces together, the knowing glances at gatherings, the conversations that abruptly stopped when she entered, the whispered, "I'm so sorry's," laced with pity. Everyone knew, and no one had told her, but the worst was yet to come. One afternoon, while compulsively checking social media, a self-inflicted torture she couldn't stop, Ellie saw the photo. Julian and Chloe at Westminster Abbey, holding hands, smiling at the camera with the golden sunset light bathing them like a divine blessing. Chloe's caption read, "Building our future together." Ellie ran to the bathroom and vomited. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just that Julian had replaced her so quickly that it seemed she had never mattered. It was that he did it publicly, without shame, without consideration for the pain he was causing. The weeks turned into an ordeal. Ellie called in sick to the museum more often than she could afford. She stopped eating properly. She stopped sleeping. She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Sunken eyes, pale skin, a sadness that had settled in her bones like a chronic disease. Her mother called from Birmingham every day. "Daughter, come home. You can't stay there, surrounded by memories." But Ellie refused. Leaving would be admitting defeat. It would be giving Julian the satisfaction of having completely destroyed her. Then the lawyer's letter arrived. Julian didn't just want a divorce. He wanted the apartment, the place they had bought together, decorated together, where Ellie had imagined raising their children someday. He argued that he had put down the largest deposit, that his salary was superior, that she could easily find another place. Ellie read the letter once, twice, 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. How far was he willing to go? The answer came 2 weeks later. Ellie was at the museum, trying to concentrate on curating a new exhibition, when her phone vibrated. It was a message from Monica. "Elle, there's something you need to know. I'd rather you hear it from me." She attached an Instagram link. Ellie felt her throat close up as she opened it. It was a photo of a ring, a diamond solitaire that reflected the light in 1,000 directions. The caption, written by Chloe, read, "When you know, you know. He said yes. Engaged. True love. New chapter." Julian had gotten engaged to Chloe. Ellie dropped the phone. Around her, museum visitors continued to admire the artwork, oblivious to the fact that a woman had just shattered into 1,000 pieces in front of a Picasso from the Blue Period. Not even a year had passed since her world fell apart, and Julian was already building a new one, as if she had been just a draft, a failed attempt, something disposable. That night, Ellie made a decision. She would not cry anymore. She would not beg anymore. She would not allow Julian Thorne to make her feel insignificant ever again. If he wanted to see her destroyed, he was in for the surprise of his life. The resurrection. The diamond reclaims her spark. Ellie woke up on April 15th with a clarity she hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany or a moment of celestial illumination. It was something much simpler and yet more powerful. The absolute exhaustion of feeling miserable. She got out of bed, those sheets that still held the ghost of a shared life, and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her from the glass was a stranger, haggard, dull, broken. "No more," she whispered. Those 2 words became her mantra. The first thing she did was call her best friend Lucy, who lived in Manchester but had been relentlessly sending supportive messages for months. "Lou, I need your help. Tell me, whatever it takes. I need to stop being this version of myself. I need to, reinvent myself, rebuild myself. I need Julian to regret every second he lost me when he sees me again." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Lucy said, "Are you ready to do whatever it takes?" "Yes." "Then I'll see you this weekend. I'm coming down, and we're starting your resurrection." Lucy arrived in London that Friday with a suitcase full of determination and a meticulously designed, detailed plan. She was a psychologist, and, more importantly, she had gone through her own divorce hell years ago. If anyone understood the process, it was her. "First things first," Lucy said, sitting on the apartment sofa with a notepad and pen. "We're going to identify which parts of you lost in this relationship and which parts you simply stopped cultivating." Ellie frowned. "What do you mean? Do you remember who you were before Julian? What were you passionate about? What did you do for pleasure, not obligation?" Ellie had to think. "It had been so long. I used to dance," she finally said, surprised by the nostalgia the word evoked. "Flamenco. I stopped when Julian said I was getting home too late from classes and that we should spend more time together." Lucy wrote it down. "What else?" "I used to travel. Alone. I loved getting lost in new cities, visiting museums, eating at local spots." "And when was the last time you did that?" Ellie couldn't remember. "See?" Lucy said softly. "You didn't just lose Julian. You lost yourself in the process of trying to be the perfect wife. Now we're going to get her back, but not the old version. An upgraded, stronger, more conscious version." Thus began the transformation. The first step was therapy. Ellie had resisted the idea for months, believing she could process everything alone. But Lucy was insistent, and Ellie finally agreed to see Dr. Reed, a psychotherapist specializing in emotional trauma and post-divorce rebuilding. "The pain you feel is real," Dr. Reed told her during their first session. "But you don't have to stay trapped in it. Grief is necessary, but so is release. Your recovery cannot be based on revenge." Dr. Reed warned her. "It has to be based on reconnecting with your own intrinsic worth. If you only transform yourself for Julian to regret, you'll still be giving him power over you." Ellie absorbed those words like gospel. The second step was physical, not because she needed to improve her body, but because she needed to reconnect with it. For months, Ellie had existed on autopilot, disconnected from herself. Lucy signed her up for a Muay Thai class. "You need to get the rage out in a productive way," she explained. At first, Ellie thought it was crazy, but the first time she hit the bag, something inside her broke free. Every punch was a betrayal, every kick a lie, every round a catharsis. She also resumed flamenco. She found an academy in Camden Town, a bohemian London neighborhood full of artists and free spirits. Her instructor, a woman named Carmen in her 50s with the fire of a warrior, looked at her evaluatively in the first class. "Flamenco is not just dance," she told her. It is pain turned into beauty, rage turned into art. If you want to truly dance flamenco, you have to be willing to bleed emotionally on the stage. Ellie was more than willing. The third step was professional. Ellie had been operating on autopilot at the museum, doing the bare minimum. But one day, her boss called her into her office. "Ellie, I know you've been going through a tough time," said the elegant director, Carla Jones. "But I need to know if you are still committed to your work here, because there's an opportunity I think would be perfect for you, but only if you truly want it." It was the chance to lead the curatorship of an international exhibition on contemporary female art. It would involve travel, coordination with museums worldwide, and media visibility. "Yes," Ellie said without hesitation. "I want it." And for the first time in months, she meant it. The fourth step was the most painful: closing chapters. Ellie signed the divorce papers without reading the details. She gave Julian the apartment. She gave him everything he asked for, not because she was weak, but because she understood something fundamental. Holding on to material things was holding on to the past. "Let him keep everything," she told her lawyer. "I'm leaving with something far more valuable: my freedom." She moved into a small but bright studio in Shoreditch, with windows overlooking a square where street musicians played jazz on weekends. It was tiny compared to the apartment she had shared with Julian, but it was completely hers. The fifth step was reconnecting with her circle. Ellie had isolated herself during the pain, but now she began rebuilding bridges. She rekindled friendships she had let languish. She met new people in her flamenco and Muay Thai classes. She surrounded herself with people who saw her for who she was, not who she had been as someone's wife. And slowly, very slowly, Ellie began to recognize herself again. 3 months later, she was standing in front of her new studio bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was no longer a stranger. There was strength in her eyes, determination in her jaw, an inner light that had been extinguished for too long. It was then that she received the message. It was from Monica, her old LSE classmate. "Elle, I don't know if you want to know this, but Julian and Chloe are throwing an engagement party. It's at the Grand Hotel Majestic next month. Supposedly it's going to be the event of the year. The guest list includes all our mutual friends. I just wanted you to be prepared in case anyone else mentions it." Ellie read the message 3 times, and then, for the first time in months, she smiled. Not a smile of bitterness, not a smile of pain, a smile of infinite possibilities. "Lou," she texted her best friend, "I need the most spectacular gown you have ever seen. I have an engagement to attend." The month that followed was a symphony of meticulous preparation. Ellie wasn't preparing for a social event. She was preparing to close a chapter of her life in the most impactful way possible. Lucy arrived from Manchester with 3 suitcases full of options. "We're not buying just any dress," she declared. "We're going to find the dress, the one that makes Julian Thorne question every decision he has ever made in his miserable life." They scoured the most exclusive boutiques on Bond Street. They tried on dozens of options in the ateliers of emerging designers in Shoreditch. Ellie stood in front of full-length mirrors again and again, evaluating every cut, every drape of fabric, every detail. "No," she would say again and again, "it's not the one yet." Until they arrived at a small workshop tucked away on a side street in Chelsea. The designer was a French woman named Anaïs Beaumont, known for creating pieces that didn't just dress the body, but told stories. "What do you want this dress to say?" Anaïs asked, observing Ellie with piercing eyes. Ellie didn't have to think of the answer. "I want it to say that I survived, that I rebuilt myself, that I am stronger than anyone, including myself, ever thought I could be." Anaïs smiled. "Then I know exactly what you need." The dress she brought was a masterpiece, structured yet fluid, powerful yet feminine. It was neither ostentatious nor loud. It was elegant with a silent intensity. The kind of dress that didn't need to beg for attention because it simply commanded it. When Ellie tried it on, Lucy let out an audible sigh. "That's it," she said simply. But the dress was only one part. Ellie knew that the true transformation had to be holistic. She booked an appointment at an exclusive salon, not to change who she was, but to enhance what had always been there. Her hair, which she had neglected for months, was treated with luxury products and cut by a stylist who understood exactly what she needed. An elegant style that reflected sophistication and control. Her self-care routine became a sacred ritual, not out of vanity, but out of self-respect. Every cream she applied to her face was a reminder that she was worth the time and attention. Every workout session was an affirmation of her strength. But more important than any external preparation was the internal one. The sessions with Dr. Reed intensified. Ellie worked on visualizations, on emotional anchoring techniques, on strategies to maintain her composure no matter what Julian said or did. "Remember," Dr. Reed would tell her, "you are not going to that party for Julian. You are going for you, to close the loop, to prove to yourself, not to him, that you walked out of the fire stronger." Ellie nodded, absorbing every word. She also worked with Carmen, her flamenco instructor, on something unexpected: stage presence. Flamenco teaches you to occupy space without apology, Carmen explained during one of their private lessons. When you step onto a stage, or into any room, you have to do it with the certainty that you deserve to be there, not with arrogance, but with dignity. They practiced walking. It seemed ridiculous at first. Ellie knew how to walk, for God's sake. But Carmen showed her the difference between merely moving and truly commanding every step. Shoulders back, chin high, but not strained. Look forward, not at the floor. Every step should say, "I am exactly who I need to be." Ellie practiced in front of the academy mirror until that walk felt natural, until it became a part of her. As the engagement date approached, Ellie began to feel something unexpected. Calm. A deep certainty that, no matter what happened that night, she would be fine. A week before the event, Lucy took her to a seaside restaurant for dinner. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Yes," Ellie replied, "but not in the way I thought I would be." "What do you mean?" "I thought I would go to that party filled with rage, wanting to make Julian suffer. But now I just want to go to say goodbye. To that version of me who thought I needed his approval. To that relationship that made me feel small. To that entire chapter of my life." Lucy smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "That, my friend, is exactly the right attitude." The night before the party, Ellie couldn't sleep, not out of anxiety, but out of anticipation. She sat in her studio window, looking out at the square lit by lampposts, listening to the distant murmur of the city that never sleeps. She thought of everything she had lost, but also everything she had gained: self-knowledge, inner strength, an unbreakable support circle, a flourishing career, and, most importantly, self-respect. At 3 a.m, she wrote in her journal, something Dr. Reed had suggested as a way to process her emotions. "Tomorrow I face the ghost of who I was, not to conquer it, because there is no battle anymore, but just to bid it farewell with grace." Julian Thorne was a chapter of my story, but not the end. And when I walk through the doors of that hotel, I will do so not as the betrayed wife I was, but as the woman I chose to be. Powerful, free, unbreakable. The morning of the event dawned clear, with that deep blue sky only London could offer. Ellie woke up with determination flowing through her veins. She took her time getting ready. Every action was deliberate, conscious. The hot shower was a meditation. The makeup, subtle but flawless, was an art. Putting on the gown was a ritual. When she was finally ready, she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom. The woman looking back was unrecognizable, not because she had changed physically, though she certainly looked spectacular, but because she emanated something entirely different. There was no longer any trace of the broken woman who had cried on the floor of her old apartment. There was no shadow of the betrayed wife who had begged for explanations. This woman radiated power, elegance, autonomy. This woman was free. Lucy arrived at 7 in the evening to accompany her. When she saw Ellie, she was speechless for a moment. "My God," she finally whispered. "You are going to destroy him." Ellie smiled, but it was a serene smile. "I'm not going to destroy him. I'm just going to remind him what he lost, and then I'm going to move on with my life." The taxi took them through the illuminated streets of London to Piccadilly. The Savoy Hotel stood majestic with its Art Deco facades and windows bathed in golden light. As they approached the entrance, Ellie felt her heart pound, but not from fear, from anticipation, from power. "Hey," Lucy said, taking her hand. "If at any point you want to leave, we leave. No explanations, no apologies." "I know," Ellie replied, "but it's not going to happen. I came to do this, and I'm going to do it right." They got out of the taxi. The hotel's glass doors awaited them like the threshold between two worlds, the one that had been and the one that would be. Ellie took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and she walked forward. Show your support for Ellie by liking the video. And if you want to see more mini novels like this, subscribe to the channel, because there's a lot more to come. The lobby of the Savoy was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like captured constellations, casting shards of light onto marble floors that reflected every movement like a liquid mirror. Monumental floral arrangements of roses, peonies, and orchids scented the air with an almost intoxicating sweetness. Ellie crossed that space with the grace of a queen, returning to reclaim her kingdom. Hotel staff watched her with that blend of discreet admiration and professional curiosity reserved for particularly stunning guests. A receptionist directed her toward the ballroom on the 3rd floor, where the engagement party was being held. "Lucy," Ellie murmured as they ascended the carpeted staircase, because the elevator would have been too fast, too ordinary for this moment. "How do I look?" Her friend looked at her with an almost fierce intensity. "Like you're about to rewrite history." The double doors to the Lancaster ballroom were open, revealing a space that seemed designed for 19th century European royalty. Vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes of cherubs and clouds. Arched windows offering views of illuminated London. Tables dressed in linen. Centerpieces combining candles and flowers, and crystal glasses that captured the light like diamonds. And in the center of all that splendor was Julian Thorne. Ellie saw him before he saw her. He was standing near a high table, surrounded by a group of men Ellie recognized as his colleagues from the architectural firm. He wore an impeccably cut tuxedo, his hair perfectly groomed, that confident smile that had once made her heart beat faster. Beside him, her arm possessively linked with Julian's, was Chloe Vance. Ellie studied her with clinical objectivity. She was attractive, certainly, sophisticated, wearing a gown that had clearly been chosen to impress, full of details and embellishments that screamed, "Look at me." Her laugh was loud, performative, designed to ensure everyone in the room knew she was the woman of the hour. Ellie felt nothing. Not rage, not jealousy, not even contempt. Only a kind of quiet indifference that surprised even herself. "Shall we go in?" Lucy asked softly. Ellie nodded. And then, with every ounce of dignity she had cultivated during those months of rebuilding, Ellie walked into the ballroom. The effect was immediate. Conversations didn't stop abruptly. That would have been too cinematic. But there was a palpable shift in the room's energy. Heads began to turn. Murmurs began to spread like ripples in a pond. Ellie didn't look around seeking validation. She simply walked, with that stride Carmen had taught her, toward the bar at the far end. It was at that moment that Julian saw her. Ellie wasn't looking in his direction, but she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical pressure. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw his face cycle through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, something that looked dangerously like panic. "Ellie!" she heard Chloe say sharply, clearly alerted by Julian's reaction. "What is she doing here?" But Ellie paid no mind. She ordered a glass of red wine at the bar, an excellent Bordeaux, she noted with approval, and allowed herself a moment to observe the room. She recognized many faces. Mutual friends who had taken Julian's side, or who had simply disappeared from her life after the separation. Colleagues from the architectural firm. Important clients. The cream of the London professional scene. And they were all looking at her. "Fernanda!" The voice came from behind, deep, familiar, tinged with something that could have been shock or fear, or both. Ellie turned slowly, took a sip of her wine, and finally looked Julian Thorne in the eyes. What she saw satisfied her more than any elaborate revenge ever could have. Julian was staring at her as if seeing a ghost, as if the floor beneath his feet had become unstable, as if everything he thought he knew about the universe had just been called into question. "Julian," she said in a soft but firm voice, "congratulations on your engagement." What are you doing here?" Ellie arched an eyebrow. "It's a public event, isn't it? Several of our mutual friends are here. I thought it would be rude not to congratulate you personally." Chloe appeared beside Julian, clinging to his arm like a castaway to a life raft. Up close, Ellie could see the lines of tension around her eyes, the way her smile was more of a grimace. "I don't recall sending you an invitation," Chloe said with venomous sweetness. Ellie looked at her with a calmness that clearly unnerved the other woman. "I didn't need one, but thank you for your concern." The silence that followed was awkward, but Ellie felt no urgency to fill it. She simply drank her wine, waiting. It was Julian who finally spoke, his voice trying to sound casual, but trembling slightly. "You look different." "Different?" Ellie repeated, allowing a small smile to curve her lips. "I suppose I do. You are seeing me as I am, when I'm not wasting my time trying to save a marriage with someone who didn't value it." Julian paled. Chloe squeezed his arm tighter. "Look," Ellie continued, her voice remaining perfectly modulated. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I truly wish you both the best. You clearly found each other at the perfect time in your lives." She paused, letting those words and all their implications sink in. "I found something too," she added. "I found myself. Turns out, she was there all along. I was just too busy being your wife to notice." "Ellie," Julian began, but she held up a hand. "I don't need you to say anything. Really, I don't. I just wanted to come, see you happy with your new life, and close this chapter properly. So," she raised her glass, "cheers to new beginnings." And then, without waiting for a reply, Ellie walked away. What transpired in the next 2 hours was a masterclass in dignity and social power. Ellie circulated the room with natural grace, conversing with old friends, introducing herself to new people, being charming without being effusive. She spoke of her work at the museum, the upcoming international exhibition she was curating, her recent travels to Paris and Milan to coordinate art loans. People gravitated toward her, not because she was trying to draw attention, but because there was something magnetic about her presence, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the forced celebration of the engagement happening around her. "Ellie," Monica said to her at one point, taking her arm and leading her to a more private corner. "My God, you are radiant. What happened?" Ellie smiled. "I stopped needing anyone else's approval to feel complete." Monica hugged her tightly. "We all knew Julian was an idiot, but seeing you like this is like watching a phoenix rise." Meanwhile, Ellie was acutely aware that Julian hadn't stopped watching her. She felt it even when she wasn't looking directly at him, and every time their eyes accidentally met, she saw that same bewilderment, that same growing regret. Chloe had noticed too. Her laughter had become more strained, her grip on Julian more possessive. Every few minutes, she dragged him to another group of guests, introducing him as my fiancé, with an emphasis that revealed insecurity more than joy. Near 10 o'clock, when Ellie was considering making her exit, she had achieved what she came to do after all. Julian finally approached her alone. He was standing on one of the hotel terraces, looking out at the lights of London spreading like a blanket of terrestrial stars. When he sensed her presence, "Ellie," Julian said quietly, "can we talk?" She turned, surprised to find vulnerability in his face. The confident, controlled Julian was gone. This man looked small. "What do you want to talk about, Julian?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Ellie remembered from years ago. I made a mistake." The words hung in the night air. Ellie looked at him, expecting to feel satisfaction, triumph, even rage, but she only felt a distant sadness, like recalling an old wound that had already healed. "A mistake?" she repeated softly. "Julian, you didn't betray me by mistake. You didn't build an entire relationship with another woman by mistake. You didn't publicly humiliate me by mistake. You made choices, active, repeated choices, over months. I know, but I didn't know what I had until I lost it. Seeing you tonight, like this, and so radiant, I realized I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Ellie felt something liberating in that moment. For months, she had fantasized about this moment. Julian begging, apologizing, admitting his wrong. She had imagined different responses, from magnanimously forgiving him to devastating him with cruel words. But now that it was happening, she realized that none of those fantasies mattered. "Julian," she said, with a gentleness that surprised even herself, "I believe you. I believe you regret it. But your regret is not my responsibility. You don't owe me anything except, perhaps, the lesson to never treat another person the way you treated me. But if we could, Ellie interrupted firmly. You are engaged to another woman, a woman who is inside, waiting for you, probably wondering why you've been following me with your eyes all night. That is your reality now, and my reality is that I no longer need your regret to validate my worth." Julian looked at her as if seeing someone completely new. "When did you get so strong?" Ellie smiled, and in that smile was release. "I was always strong. I was just wasting that strength, trying to save something that couldn't be saved. Now I use it to build the life I deserve." She turned to leave, but then paused and looked at him one last time. "I sincerely wish you the best, Julian. I hope you're happy, but more than anything, I hope you learn to value people while you have them, not just after you lose them." And with that, Ellie walked away. She didn't look back. She found Lucy near the exit, and together they descended the hotel steps toward the illuminated streets of London. "How do you feel?" Lucy asked once they were outside, breathing the city's night air. Ellie thought about it for a moment. She felt the weight of the gown, the echo of all the conversations, Julian's final look filled with regret. And then she unexpectedly began to laugh. It wasn't a bitter or sarcastic laugh. It was genuine, liberating. The laugh of someone who was finally free. "I feel," she searched for the right words, "I feel like I've closed a book I'd been reading for too long, like I can finally start a new story." They walked through the streets of Soho without haste, enjoying the night magic of the city. They passed cafes where couples shared laughs, and squares where musicians played melodies that mixed with the city's murmur. "You know what the craziest thing is?" Ellie said eventually. "For all those months after the betrayal, I thought I needed Julian to regret it. I thought that would be the thing that would make me feel better. But when it finally happened, it didn't matter. Because you don't need his validation anymore. You validated yourself." Lucy squeezed her hand. "That, my friend, is exactly the point." They arrived at Ellie's studio near midnight. From her window, London stretched in all directions, a city of infinite possibilities. Ellie took off the gown, that dress that had been her armor for the night, and changed into comfortable clothes. But she didn't feel less powerful. The power, she realized, had never been in the dress. It had always been in her. She sat at her window with a cup of tea, looking at the city that had watched her break and then rebuild stronger. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Monica. "After you left, Julian looked lost." Chloe was furious. "I think you just ruined their perfect night. Icon!" Ellie smiled but didn't reply. She didn't need reports on what she had left behind. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote, "Tonight I closed a chapter that had been open too long. I saw Julian. I heard him apologize. I felt his regret. And I discovered something beautiful. I no longer care. For months I thought my healing depended on him acknowledging what he lost. But my healing was never about him. It was always about me. About reconnecting with my intrinsic worth. About remembering that my completeness doesn't depend on being loved by someone else. I am Eleanor, not Julian's ex-wife, not the betrayed woman, just Eleanor, whole, strong, free. And tomorrow, when I wake up, I will begin a new day of a life that is entirely mine, a life where I no longer carry the weight of past betrayals, a life where I can love again, but this time starting with loving myself." She closed the journal and looked out at the future stretching before her, bright and full of promise. Because Ellie had discovered the most liberating truth of all. You don't need someone to regret losing you to know your value. You just need to remember who you are when you stop defining yourself by someone else. And that woman, that whole, powerful, free woman, was unstoppable. Final reflection and call to action. The story of Eleanor is not just about a betrayal and overcoming it. It is about the most important journey any woman can undertake, the journey back to herself. At some point in life, many of us lose fragments of our identity in the process of loving others. We adjust our dreams, silence our voices, and make ourselves smaller to make room for someone else. And when that person betrays, breaks, or abandons us, we feel like we have lost everything. But the truth is this: when you lose someone who didn't value you, you have lost nothing. You have gained the opportunity to reclaim yourself. Rebuilding is not easy. It requires looking directly at the pain without anesthesia. It requires inner work that no one else can do for you. It requires the courage to let go of what was and embrace what can be. But when you finally get to the other side, when you look in the mirror and recognize the woman you see, when you walk with your head high, not out of arrogance, but out of dignity, when your happiness no longer depends on anyone else's validation, you discover a power that no one can ever take away. You don't need your ex to regret. You don't need to win the breakup. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to remember your own worth, your own completeness, your own light. Because women don't break, they transform. And when they rise from the ashes of betrayals, they shine with an intensity that consumes everything around them. That is the true ending of every story of overcoming. Not revenge, but liberation. Not hatred, but indifference. Not need, but autonomy. You too can shine like that. You already have everything you need within you. You just have to remember to look inward, not at the one who left you behind. Because your story doesn't end with the one who betrayed you. It only begins with you.